if you guys are as energized as we are by the last two presentations, I imagine there will be some audience questions, so we wanted to give you guys the floor first. Okay, I guess we should have. Yes.
How many of you are excited about the future? Okay, 50-50, I would say. 50-50, it looks like. Would anyone like to share why you're pessimistic about the future? No? Okay, well, looks like the audience wants to be addressed. Yeah.
If you handle those issues in your programs, for instance, or in your work, could you comment on that?
Yeah, so at GEMS, we're in a collaboration with Singularity University, and one of the things we do is we've co-created a global futures curriculum to help students get to terms with the changing world, but also, more importantly, there's a global innovation challenge in which students are expected to use these exponential technologies to solve the 12 global grand challenges facing our species. So broad areas like education, sustainability, governance, shelter, and so on. So you're starting to see more and more schools emphasizing the importance of solving problems in the real world. And so I'm hugely optimistic. If you just go to Silicon Valley and see the number of people working on solving the big problems facing humanity, you will come back feeling extremely optimistic. Whatever is scarce now, energy, food, water, in 15, 20 years, we are going to solve many of these problems. And in fact, the solar energy industry now employs more people than oil and gas combined. So things are going to change, and we have every reason to be optimistic. That's not to say the world is perfect. I'm not saying the world is perfect at all. We have a long way to go, but things are getting better, and things will continue to get better as we leverage these exponential technologies.
And if I could add to that point, I think we probably both agree, that process requires investing in humans, right? And upgrading humans as we are today before we merge with, the AI, right? And schools are part of it, and I think we need it. And actually, in some ways, schools are more progressive than the rest of society in teaching in the best schools, teaching self-practice, self-reflection, this sort of interpersonal thinking, and how can we take that out, into society, into government, into all these different domains, yeah.
I actually have two questions. Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed both of the talks. They were wonderful. And I just wanted to know, first, the Centaur chess program, how exactly do humans and machines work together to compete against one another?
So, just as IBM Deep Blue didn't actually move the chess pieces, it told its human controllers what moves to make, and the human controllers made it. So it's humans using suggestions made by machines and often overriding them and saying, you know what, I don't really agree with that. Just as you do with Google Maps. I mean, I don't know if you drive, but most of us drive. And often Google Maps is right, but sometimes Google Maps is wrong. It happens over and over again. And so your human brain overrides it and says, you know what, I'm not going to listen to Google Maps on this occasion. I'm going to do my own thing.
It's hard to beat Google Maps, though.
It's hard to beat Google
Maps. I've tried.
But it's not infallible.
And just one more question to all three of you. The revolution that you're suggesting for the education system is wonderful. It's just, what kind of timeline can we expect this to be enacted in? Because this would be great if students today learned in the style that you're suggesting, the things that you're suggesting, but how soon can we expect it?
Of all the sectors out there, health and education are the slowest to change. So I'm not hugely optimistic, but at the same time, I'm starting to see individual principals and heads of schools do bold things, take risks. And what we need is we need to hire more principals and senior leaders in educational systems around the world who are willing to take risks and who are aware of how the world is changing. So it's a matter of who the leader is in that particular school.
And I would just add to that, I'm very interested in, and actually something that we're working on in the first wave of social media, right? has played out in some ways, I think, and I think we're going to see. I'm excited to see what the next wave of social media and social networking has to offer, and that I'm really excited in ways in which that might impact our ability to work together as humans.
Could we do in the back and then here in the front, if we could get a mic? Sorry, I didn't see you back there.
It's okay. Is it working? Yeah. So I really found the presentation amazing. In fact, GEMS is making me feel more optimistic now with all your vision and everything. And just to add to it, like, I'm even following Jason Silva. And I just like the whole presentation in general. But yes, like he asked already, like how soon can we see? As parents, we are ready. As visionaries, you are there. So why don't we just kickstart whatever the education system you are talking about?
Yeah,
Just a comment, yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. And to be completely honest, one of the challenges we're facing is from parents. Because most parents think, don't experiment with my kid. My kid needs to get his grades. He needs to go into Harvard and Yale and Stanford and Princeton. Don't mess with him by talking to him about meaning and purpose and awe and wonder. He needs to get those grades. So education has to be a collaborative effort. It's not just about educating the students. It's also about upskilling and retraining the teachers, and also involving parents in these discussions and reassuring them that, look, if we don't experiment with your kids, we're doing them a disservice, because we now live in a world of accelerating change. And as the World Economic Forum said in its report in 2016, 65% of the jobs that kids entering high school will do in their future don't even exist yet. So what sort of education are we giving them when we don't know what we are educating them for? So a brief answer to your question is, how do we overcome the resistance from the various stakeholders? And I don't have that answer, except education in its broadest sense.
I can speak from a very sort of pragmatic perspective. I'm on the board of a school, and I visit lots of schools, and I've been around different countries, and I think schools respond very quickly when there's policies in place, when there's tests in place, and when there's inspections in place. So I think the quickest way to get change on a large scale is to really pull the levers of policy and assessment, because what gets measured is where, on average, schools at large put their attention.
And to work outside, school systems, to work, with government, absolutely, nonprofits, and even for-profit can drive a lot of this forward, I think.
I think both of you, both presentations brought up the importance of students solving problems in our community, and Anna and Chris, you ended with the new question that you have posed through the previous years of your work, and how might humans use learning to secure the future of humanity and the planet. So I find your question quite empowering to the individual, and I'm curious if you can expand on the continuity of your projects, especially working with students to solve organizations' challenges. What's the impact? What's the continuity of that? And perhaps, after you're done, maybe Rohan, you can also talk about that continuity with your work.
I'll say just one thing and let Anna respond. So we posed a question, but we're already doing that as humanity. We're already learning, it's already in progress. So, it's in progress. So it's maybe a little bit rhetorical in a sense. We're all engaged in that process, and Rohan's presentation is largely about that, that learning of humanity to evolve ourselves. So it's already happening. So
I think specifically about challenge-based learning for students and the impact of, were you speaking to the last project that we mentioned, or? Right. Yeah, so if you weren't here earlier, we're working with the Dubai Institute of Design and Innovation on a large-scale innovation program for schools. And basically what's been really interesting, because we worked with DIDI on the whole concept and then piloting it and then growing it, and corporates are hungry to get the opinions of Generation Y, Z, people that are currently 13 and are going to be consumers in 7 years. And so there's they're already consumers, but they're going to have a lot more money once they finish high school. So I think the more that we can pull these sort of different groups of people together, we can do really interesting things in terms of impact, in terms of the different projects that we've done. For example, last year in Project Design Space, Splash was one of the sponsors, and they asked students to design a collection of wearable electronic garments. And so youth across the country developed all sorts of really interesting garments, and the fashion and design team from Splash took those ideas and they're using it to influence their future collections. And so I think the more that we're trying to bring interesting groups together and get youth to work with government entities, nonprofit entities, to solve these interesting problems, we'll start to see more and more practical application of that in terms of what corporates are doing, but we're optimistic.
And just really quickly, who are the youth? Who are the students?
Yeah, so in the case of that particular project, the nearly 4,000 youth across the country, I mean, we went out across the whole country. So the ministry put it out to their schools. We put it out to many of the schools in the KHDA. So it's a mix. We had French schools, we had ministry schools, we have American schools, British schools, IB schools. So it's really a broad mix of the population, Indian curriculum schools.
And I'd like to say that the tuition of the school is not a predictor of their success in completing the design challenge. So it's really nice to see that across sort of these different tuition brackets, both at expensive schools and schools that are very affordable, students, ideas can come from anywhere, right? And so a program like this lets that happen.
Yeah, last year we had a design challenge, Design the Car Showroom of the Future, which was sponsored by IBM. And the winning design out of hundreds of submissions, and it was selected by car showroom people as well as people at IBM, was from a not particularly strongly funded school. So it's really great to see. It doesn't really matter what curriculum you're from. If you have great ideas, people respond to that.
I think, yes, in the back.
Yeah. I really enjoyed both of the presentations, and I was really happy at the start of the presentation when you said that we should be optimistic about artificial intelligence. And I was just wondering, on the time that we're living, and I hope I'm not taking the subject out of education, and maybe we can put it together. What about the warfare, new technology, and the use of drones and are you educating the kids not to do it? Or
Yeah.
how is that?
Yeah, good question. So most people, when you say to them, the world is getting better, they bring up the issue of warfare. Now, war is a technical word defined by the United Nations as any conflict with over 1,000 deaths on average per year. So that's a technical definition. And by that definition, in the 1990s, we had 13 wars. Today, it's down to 7, the lowest number of wars ever in the history of humanity. We're now living in what's being described as the long peace. This is the longest period in human history that the world powers have gone without fighting. If you look at the data, if you look at the statistics, the average number of deaths per war has fallen cataclysmically. So we are living in the safest time in human history, but if you read the newspapers, you wouldn't realize that, because the newspapers focus on the mantra, if it bleeds, it leads. They peddle in bad news. They peddle in negative news and pessimistic news because no one wants to hear good news. And they hijack a system in our brain called a part of our brain called the amygdala, which has been hardwired to seek danger. And so news agencies and news channels sort of hijack that system and constantly feed us negative news. So coming to your question of warfare and technology. Technology is a tool, like a hammer is a tool. You can use the hammer to hammer a nail and build a building, or you can use it to smash someone's skull in. The hammer itself is neutral. It's how we use those technologies. So what we need to do is educate children about the ethical issues behind the development of these new technologies. So the moral and ethical issues behind artificial intelligence and drones for warfare and so on are hugely important. And that's what I mean when I say we need to revisit what we teach our kids. Right now, we're doing a fairly good job in how we teach our kids. We've made much progress, but what we teach is still very industrial age. Science in the science box, English in the English box, study for your exams, get good grades. And so we need to focus now on what we teach. And that's where those existential study subjects come in, you know.
Any comment on the attack drones?
Well, I'll just pick up on one thing Rohan said around the amygdala, and you know, our work is certainly kind of in line with this. That it's very easy to get hijacked by the stories are incredibly powerful, right? And so, so we can reprogram the stories we tell ourselves, you know, and we've seen this come up again and again in our work, right? At helping, you know, the people who are in our workshops, in our programs, to rewrite their own narratives, right? It happens in the DBA program, in the DIDI program. You know, we're really emphasizing that students can. Like, I'm not just a student. I can solve a problem for the Dubai Mall. I can solve a problem for IBM. So it's like, how can we actively and more intentionally take back our narrative and our inner narrative and the stories we're telling ourselves, and I think that's the answer.
Yes, here.
Hi.
And this, I'm afraid, is our last audience question.
Thank you. I found it really interesting that everyone's talking about the students and how this is going to impact the students. And regarding the design for learning, I'm a teacher myself. And I believe, I don't know the exact statistics, but newly qualified teachers only last around 4 years before they leave the teaching profession completely. Especially in somewhere like the UAE and other countries with international schools, teachers are coming and they're doing their 2-year contracts and they're moving on to another country. So how do we combat the disparity between teachers that have been here a long time and are practicing old school teaching styles and not picking up the new design for learning aspects, and the new teachers that come in motivated but then disappear? How do we keep that consistency with bringing the students' learning and the disparity between the generations of the teacher and the student?
I'll make one comment and pass it along. We've observed in our work that culture is extremely, so I would say it's about building strong cultures. We've noticed that people adapt extremely quickly to when they're sort of immersed in a new culture. So if a school has an extremely strong culture, or any organization, to your point, has an extremely strong culture, we observe our participants, maybe they come in and they're optimistic, but they're in a culture that's pessimistic. In a couple weeks, they're pessimistic. Like, conversely, if they come in and the culture is very optimistic and is a certain direction, then very quickly they adapt to that culture. So it, and this maybe is a little bit what we mean by programming humans. It's like, and to our point about the interdimension of learning design, is how do we create cultures, right, that perpetuate sort of the kind of behaviors and beliefs and actions that we want. The problem is who decides, right? So yeah, that's
Yeah, I think this boils down to really strong leadership and leaders. I mean, it's not just in schools, it's in any organization. We work with a lot of corporates as well, especially on the coaching side. You have to make an environment that people want to stay in to work. The reason why we left our school factory in Japan is that, you know, everyone's creative, right? So at a certain point, reading the script, like, it's mind-numbing, even though the people in front of you are amazing. Like, I couldn't read the script anymore. I had to leave. And so I think it's really important that the leadership of a school or any organization really thinks about teachers as learners and creating a really vibrant place to work. And that involves a lot of discipline around reflective practice, right? It's like, I have to be disciplined to meditate every day. It's good for me, and it'll make me a better person. I'm a mom of 3 young kids. I need it to be a good mom, but I have to have that discipline. So I think in terms of getting teachers, old teachers to take on new methodologies and new teachers to stay, you really have to create an amazing place to be.
Cool. Yeah, just very quickly, I completely agree with what was just said, and just want to add that in Big Think, there was an article with a big headline which said, people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. So if teachers are quitting schools, it's really because of the culture and the climate of that school. And you have schools where teachers come to school excited and full of energy and vibrancy, and you have schools in which teachers are jaded and bored and can't wait to get the heck out. And so it all boils down to leadership. So we'll end on that.
And none of you are particularly concerned with the leadership emerging as corporations like IBM, which we can presume are more profit-oriented than they are teacher and student-oriented?
Well, the connection between corporations and technology and education is that many of these companies, IBM, Facebook, Google, first create the technology and then try to find a pedagogical use for it. And so there's a huge mismatch between the education and technology. And so that's the main concern for me, that a lot of these technologies are being created not for education, but being foisted on the educational system after they've been created, because they see, oh, well, there's a huge market out there, thousands and millions of students, let's give them more Excel sheets, you know. So that's my issue with companies like IBM and Microsoft and Google. Really, these big companies have very little going in terms of solid, sound pedagogy when it comes to education. I mean, check out Google for education, nothing exciting happening there. Neither Apple for education, all, you know, Microsoft for education. It's just the products that they already have that they're trying to find an educational use for.
Thanks, everyone. We're entering our final session. Please join me in thanking Chris and Ann Batchelder of Bonn Education and Rohan Robert.